Look at this, you pathetic child. No, please, this can't be real.
Mrs. Reed, you brought violence into a sacred space. The court sentences you to 25 years in the Georgia Department of Corrections without possibility of parole.
A bride's dream wedding turned into a nightmare when her mother-in-law decided she would never say, "I do." St. Mary's Cathedral in Atlanta, Georgia. The stained glass windows cast rainbow light across the pews. 200 guests, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon, white roses cascading down every surface. Olivia Harper stood at the altar in her ivory gown, hand in hand with Daniel Reed, the man she was about to marry. Then, in front of everyone, she collapsed. Blood bloomed across the white fabric like a crimson flower. Gasps erupted through the cathedral. Flower arrangements toppled as guests surged forward. The music stopped mid-note. Daniel stood frozen, his face drained of color, staring down at his bride writhing on the marble floor. And in the chaos, guests had to physically restrain one person, Daniel's own mother, Margaret Reed. What happened in those final moments before Olivia fell? What secret buried beneath this family was so dark that it drove a mother to murder at her son's wedding? Welcome to Mysterious Crime Chronicle. My mom and I made a bet that I wouldn't get up to 500 subscribers. Let's help me win this bet and surprise her by subscribing to this channel right now. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and if anything this shocking has ever happened in your town. Because what started as the happiest day of Olivia's life ended with her bleeding out on consecrated ground, a groom in handcuffs, and a mother-in-law with a secret she was willing to kill to protect. This is the story of how a buried affair sparked a murder at the altar and tore apart a family forever. To understand why blood soaked that altar, we have to go back. Back to when Olivia Harper thought her past was buried for good. The morning of the wedding. The Ritz-Carlton Bridal Suite, 14th floor, overlooking Centennial Olympic Park. Olivia stood at the window watching Atlanta's skyline shimmer in the June heat. Her bridesmaids popped champagne. Her mother fussed with the veil. Everything glowing, everything perfect. "Baby, you're shaking," her mother said, touching her arm. Olivia forced a smile. "Just nerves." But it wasn't nerves. 28 years old, advertising executive at a firm on Peachtree, Olivia had worked hard to build her life in Atlanta. She'd met Daniel 2 years ago at a charity fundraiser in Midtown. Investment banker, 32, kind eyes, stable. When he proposed under the magnolias at Piedmont Park, she cried. This was her fresh start. Her chance to leave the past where it belonged. Except the past doesn't stay buried. Not in Atlanta. Not when you're marrying into one of Buckhead's oldest families. Because 3 years before that moment in the bridal suite, Olivia had made a choice that would cost her everything. She'd had an affair with a married man. 3 months of hotel rooms and lies. She was 25, reckless, convinced no one would ever find out. The man's name was Richard Reed, Daniel's father, Margaret's husband, and Margaret knew. Daniel Reed woke up that morning in his apartment off West Peachtree feeling like the luckiest man alive. His groomsmen were already there, cracking jokes, straightening bow ties. His phone buzzed. "Morning, sweetheart. Big day. Your father would be so proud. See you at the church." Daniel smiled, texted back a heart. He'd always been close to his mother, especially after his father died in that car wreck on 85 3 years ago. She'd leaned on him hard. He was all she had left. 8 weeks after Daniel proposed, Margaret hired a man named Curtis Webb. Private investigator, office indicator. She told herself she just needed to be sure. Just needed to know who this girl really was. "Standard background check," she'd said, sliding an envelope across his desk. "Nothing crazy." But Curtis Webb was thorough. He found the hotel receipts from the Georgian Terrace. The text messages Olivia thought she'd deleted. Timestamps that matched Richard's supposed business trips. When Curtis handed Margaret the file, she sat in her car in the parking lot for an hour. Didn't open it. Didn't move. Then she opened it. Every page felt like a slap. Richard and Olivia. Her husband and this girl. 3 months of meetings. 3 months while Margaret was home planning their 30th anniversary party. The affair had ended abruptly. No explanation in the file. But Margaret understood why now. Richard had died 2 weeks after the last hotel receipt. And now this woman was going to marry her son. Margaret Elaine Reed, 55 years old, chairwoman of the Junior League, board member at the Fox Theater and the High Museum. Her family had been in Atlanta since before the streets had names. The kind of woman people called refined. The kind who never raised her voice, never showed cracks. But that file cracked something deep. She'd spent 30 years building a life with Richard. Survived his gambling debts in the 90s. Survived the year he lost half their money on a failed restaurant venture. She'd stood by him. For weeks after reading that file, Margaret couldn't look at Daniel the same way. Every time he mentioned Olivia, Margaret felt something twist in her chest. Her son was about to marry the woman who'd betrayed her. Who'd slept with Richard while Margaret was at home believing in her marriage. And the worst part? Richard was gone. No confrontation. No closure. Just a coffin and a headstone in Oakland Cemetery. But Olivia Harper was walking around free. Smiling. Planning a wedding. Pretending she was innocent. Margaret started following her. Not every day. Just sometimes. She'd park outside Olivia's office and watch her leave for lunch. She'd sit 3 tables away at Waffle House and watch her order pecan waffles. She'd drive past her Virginia Highland apartment at night and see the lights on. She told herself she just needed to understand. Needed to see what Richard had seen. But really? She was planning. 3 weeks before the wedding, Olivia scheduled engagement photos at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. 30 acres off Piedmont Avenue. She wanted shots in the Rose Garden, maybe some by the conservatory. The photographer was setting up when Margaret's Mercedes pulled into the lot. "Mrs. Reed," Olivia called out, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming." Margaret walked over, slow, deliberate. That same smile she used at charity luncheons. "Wouldn't miss seeing where my son fell in love for the world." The photographer snapped a few shots. Daniel and Olivia by the fountain. Olivia's laugh echoing across the garden. Margaret stood in the shade of a magnolia tree, watching. Not smiling anymore. Just watching. And Olivia felt it. That cold feeling you get when someone's looking at you differently. When someone knows something they shouldn't. "Mrs. Reed?" Olivia asked quietly. "Is everything all right?" Margaret tilted her head. Studied Olivia like she was a painting in a museum. "Bless your heart, sweetheart. Everything's just as it should be." In Atlanta, when someone says, "bless your heart," in that tone, it's never a blessing. Margaret Reed's mansion sat on 2 acres in Buckhead's Tuxedo Park neighborhood. The kind of address that made people stop and stare. Tree-lined streets. Gated driveways. Houses worth $20–30 million. The governor's mansion was just down the street. Inside, Margaret kept a room Richard never knew about. A study on the 2nd floor, tucked behind what looked like a closet door. She'd had it built years ago. Her private space. The place she went when the weight of being Mrs. Richard Reed got too heavy. After Richard died, that room became something else. Because there was something else in that file. Something the investigator had highlighted in yellow. A receipt from Planned Parenthood. Dated 6 weeks after the affair ended. Olivia's name on it. Margaret sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Had Olivia been pregnant? Had she told Richard? Is that why the affair ended so abruptly? And more importantly, is that why Richard had been so distracted those final weeks? Why he'd run that red light on the highway? Had Olivia Harper killed her husband? 4 months before the wedding, Olivia started noticing things. Small things. A car parked across from her office 3 days in a row. Silver Mercedes. Tinted windows. She'd seen that car before, in Margaret's driveway. Then there was the coffee shop incident. Octane Coffee on Marietta Street, her usual spot. She'd been sitting by the window when she looked up and saw Margaret at the counter. Not ordering. Just standing there. Watching. "Mrs. Reed." Olivia had called out, her stomach dropping. Margaret turned slowly. That smile again. "Olivia, honey. What a coincidence." But it wasn't a coincidence. Over the next few weeks, Margaret showed up everywhere. At Ponce City Market while Olivia grabbed lunch. At the Beltline when Olivia went for a run. At Lenox Square while Olivia shopped for her wedding dress. Just had to pick something up, Margaret would say each time, that same empty smile. Olivia started having nightmares. Waking up at 3 a.m., convinced someone was outside her apartment. She told Daniel once, carefully, "Your mom's been around a lot." Daniel laughed. "She's excited about the wedding. That's all." But it wasn't excitement Olivia saw in Margaret's eyes. It was calculation. Then one night, Olivia's phone rang. A known number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello." Silence. Then breathing. "Mrs. Reed." A voice, cold and measured. "Did you love him?" Olivia's blood went cold. "I don't know what you're... him." Not a question this time. The line went dead. Olivia sat on her couch for an hour, phone in her hand, trying to convince herself she'd imagined it. But she knew Margaret's voice. Knew that tone. Margaret knew about Richard. And she was done pretending. 2 months before the wedding, Olivia did something she'd promised herself she'd never do. She drove to Margaret's house. That massive stone mansion on West Pace's Ferry Road, where old money went to hide. She had to try. Had to explain. The gate was open. The circular driveway empty. Olivia knocked 3 times before Margaret answered, wearing cream linen and pearl earrings. Perfect as always. "Olivia." Her voice flat. "This is unexpected. Can we talk? Please?" Margaret stepped aside, letting her in. The foyer alone was bigger than Olivia's entire apartment. Marble floors. Crystal chandelier. A painting that looked like it belonged in a museum. They sat in the living room. Margaret in a wingback chair. Olivia on the edge of the couch, hands trembling. "I know you know," Olivia said finally. "About Richard and me." Margaret didn't blink. "Go on." "It was 5 years ago. I was young, stupid. I didn't know he was married at first. When I found out, I ended it." "You ended it," Margaret repeated, her voice like ice. "How noble." Olivia felt tears burning. "I'm sorry. God, Mrs. Reed, I'm so sorry. If I could take it back." "But you can't." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes locked on Olivia's. "You can't take back the 3 months you spent destroying my marriage. You can't take back the lies. The hotel rooms. The nights I sat here, alone, while my husband was with you." Olivia was crying now. I know, and I hate myself for it. But Daniel doesn't know. He can't know. It would destroy him." Margaret stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Then we have something in common. We both want to protect my son. Does that mean you'll..." "It means," Margaret interrupted, "that I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do about you." Olivia felt the room tilt. "What does that mean?" Margaret walked to the door, opening it. "It means you should leave now. Before I change my mind about having this conversation at all." As Olivia walked to her car, she looked back once. Margaret stood in the doorway, backlit by the chandelier. She looked like something from a Southern Gothic novel. Beautiful and terrifying. Under Georgia law, a person convicted of murder can face life without parole, life with parole, or the death penalty. Express malice requires proving deliberate intention to unlawfully take someone's life. Margaret Reed understood this. She'd spent weeks researching, reading case law, understanding what prosecutors would need to prove if she did what she was thinking about doing. She needed it to look like an accident, or self-defense, or anything but what it actually was: revenge. 6 weeks before the wedding, Margaret made a decision. She couldn't let this woman marry her son. Couldn't watch Olivia Harper walk down the aisle in white, pretending to be innocent, pretending she hadn't destroyed Margaret's entire life. But she also couldn't tell Daniel. Not without proof. Not without destroying him in the process. So she'd have to handle it herself. Margaret started planning. Slowly, carefully, the way she planned charity galas and fundraisers, with attention to every detail, every possible outcome. She needed access. She needed opportunity. She needed a moment when everyone would be distracted. The wedding would be perfect. Margaret volunteered to help with everything. Flowers, she'd tell the florist what she wanted. Catering, she had connections at the club. The dress, she'd love to come to the final fitting. Daniel was thrilled. Mom, this means so much. I know you and Olivia haven't been super close, but I want this wedding to be perfect, Margaret said, kissing his cheek. For you. What she didn't say, she wanted it to be perfect because it would be Olivia's last day alive. The week before the wedding, Margaret visited the cathedral, walked the aisle where Olivia would walk, stood at the altar where Olivia would stand, studied the exits, the guest seating, the places where security would be watching. She'd bring something small, something that wouldn't be noticed in her purse, something that would act fast. And when Olivia collapsed, Margaret would scream like everyone else. She'd play the shocked mother-in-law, the grieving guest. No one would ever suspect. Why would they? She was Margaret Reed, pillar of the community, philanthropist, devoted mother. But as she stood in that empty cathedral, staring at the altar, Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. A voice, quiet but insistent. What are you doing? She shook it off, walked back down the aisle, out into the Atlanta heat. She'd already decided. There was no going back now. The wedding was in 6 days. 6 days after Margaret stood in the empty cathedral, counting her steps to the altar. 6 days after she'd wrapped Richard's mother's knife in silk and hidden it in her closet. Saturday morning, June 14th, Margaret woke up at 4 a.m. in her Tuxedo Park mansion. Couldn't sleep. Hadn't really slept in weeks. She walked downstairs to that hidden study, turned on the lamp, and looked at the investigator's file one more time. Photos of Olivia and Richard, leaving the Georgian terrace, getting into his car, laughing. Margaret touched Richard's face in the photo. I'm doing this for us, she whispered to the picture. For what she took from us. She showered, put on the dove gray dress she'd chosen specifically because Richard had always said it made her look elegant. Applied her makeup with steady hands. Fastened her pearls. Each movement deliberate, like she was preparing for a performance. At 10 a.m., she opened her jewelry box and pulled out the velvet pouch. Inside, the knife. 4 inches of steel. Sterling silver handle engraved with the Reed family crest. She held it up to the light. Her mother-in-law had used this knife to cut her wedding cake in 1952. The irony wasn't lost on Margaret. She wrapped it back in the silk handkerchief, placed it carefully in her purse, right next to her lipstick and reading glasses. Just another Saturday accessory. By 11 a.m., Margaret was at St. Mary's Cathedral. 5 hours early. The coordinator looked surprised. Mrs. Reed, the ceremony doesn't start until 4. I know, darling. I just wanted to walk through everything one more time. Mother of the groom nerves. She laughed that practiced laugh. The one that made people trust her. The coordinator smiled and left her alone. Margaret walked down the aisle. Slowly, counting. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 32. From her seat to the altar. She'd practiced this in her mind 100 times. Now she needed to know it in her body. At the altar, she stopped. Looked at where Olivia would be standing. Imagined the knife going in. How long it would take. How people would react. She'd have maybe 3 seconds before anyone understood what was happening. 3 seconds to make this count. Was it enough? It had to be. The cathedral started filling up. Atlanta's elite. Women in designer dresses. Men in custom suits. Everyone air-kissing and talking about their beach houses and their kids at Emory. Margaret stood near the back, greeting people. Playing the proud mother-in-law. Margaret, you must be thrilled. Over the moon, Susan. Over the moon. But her friend Linda paused. Looked at Margaret closer. Honey, are you feeling all right? You look pale. Margaret forced a smile. Just emotional. You know how it is. Linda squeezed her hand. I remember when my Jason got married. I cried for a week. Yes, Margaret said quietly. It's quite an emotional day. What Linda didn't know, Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she had to keep them clasped together. Her heart was racing. Not from fear. From anticipation. A bridesmaid walked past. Young girl, maybe 25. blonde, pretty. She was carrying Olivia's bouquet to the bridal room. Margaret watched her go. Then, without thinking it through, she followed. The hallway to the bridal room was empty. Margaret could hear laughter and music coming from inside. Olivia's voice. Pappy. Excited. Margaret stood outside that door for a full minute, her hand hovering over the handle. She could walk away. Right now. Go back to the main hall. Let the wedding happen. Let Daniel marry this woman and deal with the consequences later. But then she remembered the hotel receipts. The texts. Richard's distracted eyes in those final weeks. Margaret knocked. The music stopped. The door opened. One of the bridesmaids stood there, champagne glass in hand. Mrs. Reed, do you need something? I was hoping for a quick word with Olivia. Just a moment. Mother-in-law to bride. The bridesmaid looked uncertain but stepped aside. The room went quiet. Olivia stood in front of the mirror in her dress, veil already on. She looked beautiful. Margaret hated that she looked beautiful. Mrs. Reed. Olivia's voice was careful, guarded. Is everything okay? Margaret smiled. That same smile she'd used at charity luncheons for 30 years. Could we speak privately? Just for a moment. Olivia glanced at her bridesmaids. At her mother sitting in the corner. Everyone was watching. Whatever you need to say, you can say here. Very well. Margaret stepped closer. Close enough that only Olivia and her mother could hear. I'm giving you one last chance to do the right thing. Olivia's face went white. Please don't do this. Not today. Call it off. Tell Daniel you're not ready. Make up an excuse. I don't care. But walk away from my son. I love him. You loved his father too. Didn't stop you from destroying him. Olivia's mother stood up. That's enough. Get out. But Margaret wasn't finished. She pulled an envelope from her purse. Set it on the vanity table. Hotel receipts. Text messages. Photos. Everything I know about you and Richard. If you marry Daniel today, I give this to him tomorrow. Every detail. Every lie. Olivia stared at the envelope like it was a snake. Or, Margaret continued, you leave. Tonight. You disappear. And Daniel never has to know what kind of woman you really are. The room was silent except for the organ music starting in the distance. The ceremony was about to begin. Olivia picked up the envelope, opened it, saw the first receipt from the Georgian terrace. Her hands trembled. You have 5 minutes to decide, Margaret said. Call off the wedding or I destroy your life. She walked out, closed the door gently behind her. In the hallway, Margaret leaned against the wall. Heart pounding. That went better than she'd expected. Olivia looked terrified. Maybe she'd actually leave. Maybe this would all be over without Margaret having to. The door opened. Olivia stood there, still in her dress, still wearing the veil. She handed the envelope back to Margaret. No. Margaret stared at her. What? I said no. I'm not leaving. I love Daniel. What happened with Richard was wrong, and I've lived with that guilt every single day. But I'm not running anymore. If you want to tell Daniel, tell him. I'll deal with the consequences. But I'm walking down that aisle. Olivia turned and went back into the bridal room. Closed the door. Margaret stood alone in the hallway, the envelope in her hands. Her last bargaining chip. Useless now. She walked slowly back to the main hall, to her front row seat. Set her purse on her lap. Inside the purse, the knife. If Olivia wouldn't leave willingly, Margaret would make her leave permanently. For PM, the organ switched to Pachelbel's canon. Everyone stood. Bridesmaids started walking down the aisle in their lavender dresses. One by one, each carrying a bouquet of white roses. Daniel stood at the altar. Margaret could see him from her seat. Her baby boy. 32 years old but still her baby. He looked nervous. Kept adjusting his tie. Smiling at the guests. He had no idea what was about to happen. The music swelled. Everyone turned toward the back of the cathedral. Olivia appeared. Her father's arm linked with hers. The dress caught the light from the stained glass windows. She looked like something from a magazine. Margaret's hand slipped into her purse. Olivia started walking. Slow steps. Traditional pace. 32 steps from the back to the altar. Margaret counted each one. 10, 11, 12. Her fingers found the silk handkerchief. Unwrapped it slowly. The knife handle cool against her palm. 20, 21, 22. Nobody was watching Margaret. Why would they? All eyes on the bride. The beautiful bride who'd destroyed Margaret's marriage. Who'd killed Richard just as surely as if she'd driven the car herself. 28, 29, 30. Olivia reached the altar. Her father kissed her cheek, placed her hand in Daniel's. They turned to face the priest. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice echoing through the cathedral. "We are gathered here today to join Daniel Reed and Olivia Harper in holy matrimony." Margaret gripped the knife tighter. This was it. The moment she'd been planning for months. The moment Richard would be avenged. "Marriage is a sacred bond," the priest continued. "A covenant before God and these witnesses. If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence. Margaret stood up. Not to speak, to act. She stepped into the aisle. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. A few people turned. Saw her walking forward. Smiled, thinking she wanted a better view. The mother-in-law getting emotional. How sweet. Daniel saw her next. "Mom." Confused. Not alarmed. Not yet. Then Olivia turned. Saw Margaret walking toward her. Saw something in Margaret's eyes that made her take a step back. "Mrs. Reed." Margaret pulled the knife from her purse. Everything happened in seconds. Someone screamed. Not Olivia. Someone in the back who saw the blade catch the light. Daniel yelled, "No!" and tried to push Olivia behind him. But Margaret was already there, moving faster than anyone expected. She grabbed Olivia's arm with her left hand, pulled her close. "You should have left," Margaret whispered. The knife went in just below Olivia's ribs. Margaret felt resistance. Then nothing. The blade sliding in smooth. Olivia gasped. Not a scream. Just a small intake of breath. Like she'd been surprised by cold water. Margaret twisted the knife, just like the articles had said to do. To make sure it counted. To make sure Olivia wouldn't walk away from this. Then she pulled it out. That's when the screaming really started. Blood spread across the white dress. Too fast. Olivia looked down at it like she couldn't understand where it was coming from. "Daniel?" Her voice small. Confused. Her legs gave out. Daniel caught her before she hit the marble floor. "Olivia! Olivia!" The cathedral exploded into chaos. People running. Bridesmaids crying. Someone knocked over a massive flower arrangement. Roses and water everywhere. 3 groomsmen rushed Margaret. She didn't fight. Didn't try to run. Just stood there holding the bloody knife, watching Olivia collapse in her son's arms. This was justice. Finally, after 3 years. After 30 years of marriage. After everything Richard and Olivia had stolen from her. Call 911. Somebody help her. Oh my God, there's so much blood. Daniel pressed his hands against the wound. Blood soaked through his fingers. Through his white tuxedo shirt. Olivia was trying to talk but couldn't form words. "Stay with me," Daniel kept saying. "Please, Olivia, stay with me. Don't close your eyes. Look at me. Look at me." The groomsmen had Margaret pinned against a pew. One of them, Daniel's college roommate, was shaking. "Why would you do this? Why?" Margaret didn't answer, just stared at Olivia bleeding out on the cathedral floor. Atlanta Police Zone 5 units arrived in 7 minutes. St. Mary's is in their coverage area. Downtown corridor. They'd been trained for active threats after the church shootings 2 summers ago. For officers burst through the doors. Guns drawn. Atlanta Police. Nobody move. "She's got a knife," someone yelled. "The lady in gray." Officer Marcus Williams reached Margaret first. Saw the blade in her hand. "Ma'am, drop the weapon. Drop it now." Margaret opened her hand. The knife clattered to the floor. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." She did. Cooperative. Like she'd been expecting this. Margaret Reed, you're under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. The handcuffs clicked shut. Paramedics were already working on Olivia. Pressure bandages. For lying. Her blood pressure was dropping. They needed to move fast. We're taking her to Grady, one paramedic said. Trauma center. It's our best shot. They lifted her onto the stretcher. Daniel tried to follow. Sir, you need to let us work. That's my fiancée. Then meet us at Grady. We'll take care of her. They rushed her out. Sirens screaming. Daniel stood there covered in blood. His mother in handcuffs 10 feet away. He looked at Margaret. Really looked at her. Why? Margaret met his eyes. Ask her. When she wakes up, ask her about your father. Margaret was transported to Fulton County Jail at 901 Rice Street Northwest, the same facility that had held everyone from rappers to politicians. Built to hold 1,100 inmates, currently holding over 3,000. Booking took 3 hours. Fingerprints. Property inventory. They took her pearls, her wedding ring, the blood-stained gray dress, her shoes. She was given orange scrubs. Assigned inmate number 1847362. They placed her in a holding cell. Cement walls. Metal bench. One steel toilet. Margaret sat down and waited. Fulton County Courthouse. Same building where they tried Atlanta's biggest cases. Packed courtroom. Cameras everywhere outside. This trial had everything the media loved. Wealth, betrayal, violence in a church. Margaret stood as the judge entered. Her lawyer beside her. A public defender because she'd run through her savings on bail she couldn't make. The charges: attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, possession of a weapon during commission of a felony. Under Georgia law, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon carries 1 to 20 years. But if the victim had died, it would have been murder. And murder in Georgia means life with possibility of parole after 30 years, life without parole, or death. Olivia had survived. Barely. 3 surgeries. 4 weeks in ICU at Grady. The knife had missed her liver by centimeters. Nicked her kidney. She'd live, but she'd never be the same. She testified from a wheelchair. Told the jury everything. The affair with Richard. The guilt. The way Margaret had stalked her. The confrontation in the bridal room. Daniel sat in the gallery. Not on his mother's side. On Olivia's. When it was Margaret's turn to testify, she told the truth. The affair. The betrayal. How Richard had died distracted by Olivia. How she'd planned everything for months. I don't regret it, she said on the stand. She destroyed my marriage. She destroyed my husband. Someone had to make her pay. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge looked at Margaret over his glasses. Mrs. Reed, you brought violence into a house of God. You attempted to murder a woman on what should have been the happiest day of her life. The court sentences you to 25 years in the Georgia Department of Corrections. No parole. Margaret didn't react. Just nodded once. As they led her away, she looked back at Daniel one last time. He was crying. She tried to smile, to tell him she loved him. He looked away. Olivia and Daniel never got married. The trust was broken. The trauma too deep. She moved to Charlotte 8 months later. Started over. New job. New life. She still can't wear white. Daniel stayed in Atlanta. Sold his mother's house. Donated the money to domestic violence charities. He hasn't visited Margaret once. Margaret is serving her sentence at Metro State Prison in Atlanta. Inmate number 1847362. She'll be 79 when she's released. If she lives that long. St. Mary's Cathedral still performs weddings. But they installed metal detectors after that day. And every couple gets a warning. Secrets have a way of finding the light. If this story left you speechless, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves true crime. Comment below, where are you watching from? Has anything like this happened in your area? Let's build this community together. And remember, My mom said we'd never hit 500 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Subscribe and help me shock her.